Imagine if love could kill you, not metaphorically but literally, slowly, excruciatingly, robbing you of your beauty and then your sanity. In 16th century Europe, this wasn't just a cautionary tale for children. It was a horrifying reality. Across cities and towns, following armies and merchants, a new plague spread, known as the French disease. It arrived suddenly and afflicted everyone, from cardinals to common prostitutes. First, repulsive sores appeared on the body. Then, bones began to rot, noses collapsed, and hair fell out. A person would transform into a living, decaying corpse before finally succumbing to madness from the pain and dying. Doctors threw up their hands in horror. Prayers were useless. It seemed as if the devil himself had unleashed this affliction upon the earth, and there was no escape. An entire generation lived in a pervasive fear, where a single kiss, a single night, could mark the beginning of the end. This fear was more than just an emotion. It hung in the air, transforming the very appearance of cities. Shadows, not people, now seemed to roam the streets of Padua or Paris. A man might wear a luxurious velvet doublet, yet beneath it, hide festering sores devouring his flesh. Beauties concealed their faces beneath thick veils, not out of modesty, but to hide the dark cavities where their noses once were. And the physicians? In desperation, they offered the only treatment that seemed to have any effect: mercury. Patients were confined to stuffy rooms and fumigated with poisonous vapors. Toxic ointments rubbed into their skin until their teeth fell out and madness set in. The disease was a death sentence, and the treatment a refined torture that only prolonged the inevitable. Into this world, saturated with fear and the stench of decay, stepped our protagonist. His name was Gabriele Fallopio, and he was one of the most brilliant physicians and anatomists of his era. He taught in Padua and confronted this horror daily. He witnessed wealthy merchants and noblemen who had graced balls just yesterday, now writhing in agony, their bodies covered in sores. He himself prescribed mercury to them, knowing he was sending them from one hell to another, slightly slower one. For him, this wasn't an abstract epidemic. These were the faces of his patients, the groans behind his office door. And at some point, he grasped a simple yet revolutionary truth. If this plague couldn't be cured, then people simply had to be prevented from contracting it. A barrier needed to be erected between humanity and death. And so, he began to act. Not in the quiet of his study, but directly where the tragedy unfolded. He took the finest, almost transparent linen and fashioned tiny, form-fitting sheaths from it. He then soaked these prototypes for hours in a special concoction of salts and herbs, hoping it would kill the contagion upon first contact. It was a desperate guess, almost alchemy. With a batch of these linen pouches, he embarked on the most audacious experiment of his life. He found 1,100 soldiers, men for whom casual encounters were a routine part of life, and the French disease, almost an occupational hazard. He distributed his invention to them and instructed them to use it every time. Then began the agonizing wait. Days stretched into weeks. Fallopio spent sleepless nights, imagining his endeavor failing and him going down in history as an eccentric who had doomed 1,000 souls. But when the time for verification came, the results astonished even him. Not one, not a single one of the 1,100 men fell ill. This small piece of fabric became history's first armor against an invisible death. So what was his secret? Some arcane formula gleaned from ancient manuscripts? No. His superpower was in plain sight, but no one else had thought to wield it. Fallopio was an anatomist. Every day, he took up his scalpel and dissected cadavers to understand their inner workings. He didn't believe in curses or divine retribution. He believed in what he saw with his own eyes: muscles, bones, vessels. To him, the human body wasn't a mystery, but a mechanism. And he was the first to ask a simple, almost childlike question. If disease is a poison entering the mechanism from outside, why not simply place a barrier in its path? Don't treat the consequence, block the cause. This idea was so obvious and so pragmatic that it seemed like heresy. For centuries, doctors had sought complex answers, while he found the simplest. He didn't pray, he engineered. And his small linen pouch was not a miracle, but an engineering solution. But to his fellow physicians, this was no engineering solution. It was an insult. The entire College of Surgeons in Padua All those gray-bearded professors in their robes suddenly felt like fools. For years they had prescribed mercury, written treatises on miasmas and divine punishment. And now, some upstart solves the problem with a piece of cloth? He was immediately accused of every mortal sin. City officials and university scholars cried out that Fallopio was encouraging debauchery. They claimed his sheath was a devilish trick that would allow sinners to escape divine retribution. They wrote denunciations against him, ridiculed him in pamphlets. For if one could sin without consequence, the entire world order would collapse. And no one cared that he had saved 1,100 lives. They cared that he had undermined their authority and stripped them of a convenient way to keep people in fear. But Fallopio didn't argue with them. He didn't respond to pamphlets or engage in street brawls. He did what he did best. He sat down at his desk and took up his quill. And in 1564 he published a book, a small treatise titled On the French Disease. It contained not a word of morality, nor a hint of theology, only facts. Coldly, clearly, as if on an anatomical table, he described his invention: how to sew the linen pouch, in what solution to soak it, how to use it. And most importantly, he published the results of his experiment. 1,100 men, 0 infections. This small book spread across Europe faster than any plague. While professors in Padua frothed at the mouth, trying to prove him wrong, doctors in Paris and London were already reading his work and quietly sewing their first batches of life-saving sheaths. He didn't defeat his enemies. He simply rendered them irrelevant. And the world changed. Not overnight, of course, but irreversibly. Just consider, before Fallopio, love was a deadly roulette. Every kiss could carry decay, every embrace, the beginning of dissolution. Passion meant the risk of becoming a noseless monster, writhing in pain from mercury vapors. It was a world where desire and dread walked hand in hand, where beauty was merely a mask concealing a future corpse. People feared each other. And after him? After him, humanity gained a tool. Tiny, unassuming, yet it changed everything. Now, a soldier entering a port tavern, or a nobleman heading to a clandestine rendezvous, carried not just hope, but real, tangible protection. He didn't give people a cure. He gave them control. For the first time in many decades, humanity could separate love from death. While the great minds of Europe sought complex remedies and divine signs, he simply looked at the human body, not as a vessel of sin, but as a fortress. And he saw where the gates of this fortress lay. He didn't try to devise a way to expel an enemy that had already breached the walls and was burning everything to the ground. He simply placed a lock on those gates. Small, linen, but reliable. This was the essence of his genius, the genius of an anatomist, not a mystic. He didn't try to rewrite the rules of the game handed down from the heavens. He simply found a loophole within them. And he showed the world that sometimes, to defeat a dragon, you don't need a magic sword. You just need not to open the door to it.